Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about A Flag Worth Dying For, The Power and Politics of National Symbols by Tim Marshall. And if you think the name sounds familiar, you're right. There are two other Tim Marshall books that I've talked about, and they're actually back on the shelf behind me. And it isn't because Tim Marshall is a great author in the sense of writing this beautiful prose. It's more about this series, which are called the Politics of Place series, in which he's doing broad surveys of countries and movements and ideas to help introduce us. And so I think this is both a strength and a failing of the text. And part of the reason I selected this book, A Flag Worth Dying For, I've got flags behind me, which all have importance to me in one way or another. So I was destined to review a flag book at one point or another. But this is also related to a young person in the comments. His father had written to me when I did the Power of Geography review and let me know that his 13-year-old had read, actually, I don't know if it's a mom or dad, so I'm just going to say the parent had let me know that the child, 13-year-old Elliot, had read both Power and Prisoners and had some references. And he asked me about this other book, The Future of Geography, which was about space. And I had said that I didn't really think much of the space chapter in the Power of Geography text, but I did think that the Flags book was worth reading. The parent was surprised, bought the book for the child, and as a way to sort of match that challenge, I said, well, tell Elliot if the book gets read in January, I will do a review for him. And so this is fulfilling the promise. The book was read, and what I'm going to use as a guide actually are his favorite chapters. I asked him to give me a list of those, and that's what I'm doing here. So the book, unlike Power and Power of Geography and Prisoners of Geography, is going to feel a bit more in place, in the sense of, obviously you see all these flags here. Flags don't change as frequently as potentially countries, political parties, or borders do. And actually, that's another book of his, which I'm not going to review right now. I think 3 books from Tim Marshall is plenty for the moment. But it's going to feel, let's say, more in place. And we'll start by looking at the Europe chapter, which is one of his favorite chapters. And it starts with really a discussion about the EU flag. And when I first moved to Europe in 2013, I would say that the European Union was not in an entirely certain position. There was already, let's say, talk of Brexit. Obviously, Brexit would happen a few years later. But I think I came to it as an outsider, someone who had not lived in the European Union. Prior to that, I had been a student in Italy, and it was in 2000 when I came in. They were just switching over to the euro later in the year or the following year, and so the European Union didn't feel so European Union-y, let's say, in the year 2000. But when I moved to Europe in 2013, let's say, you would see the flags everywhere and people talked about it a lot more. But as the years went on in my time in Europe, I found that more and more of the young people that I talk to are not certain that it's really necessarily an entity that's going to last. And realistically, the European Union has to ask itself what its goals are as an institution. If the idea is that it was going to create a United States of Europe, where there were going to be no borders and people were just going to move around, they've achieved that in actuality. If you're a European citizen, you can move around and live wherever you want. But it seems as though circumstances and national history have reasserted themselves to such an extent that people don't want to get rid of their borders. And so the United States of Europe project is on hold, it seems. And there are plenty of countries in the European Union that are not part of the euro, which, again, the question is, what's the point of the euro if not all the countries are going to be in it? But they've seen the economic damage that has happened because of having a single currency when you still have countries that are strong and countries that are weak within it. So is the European Union going to be around? I've tended to have this feeling that it's too big to fail. Marshall is clearly somebody who thinks the European Union is more good than bad. But he did seem to take Brexit, even though he was opposed to it, with an appropriate amount of detachment that, hey, this is the decision that was made. We're just going to have to move forward with whether it was a good decision or a bad decision. And so the European chapter, it starts strong by talking about the European Union. But as I say, you really have to, I think, talk to Europeans to get a real sense of what the European Union is. I have yet to meet a single European, and I've been to every European country except Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. I've yet to meet a European in any of those countries who can name who their member of parliament is for the European Parliament. And to me, it just, if that's the case, it still is a nerdy experiment for government elites who like the idea of the European Union. But if on the ground people can't even tell you who are the members of the European Parliament that they would vote for, then it's not a serious political project for the people. It may be for the elites, and they run many things, and that's up to them, apparently, for the moment. But the European Union, who knows? He doesn't talk about the fact that when he talks about the German flag, that the Germans are so guilt-ridden, they're so programmed by guilt, that some years ago, Merkel won another term, maybe I think it was her last term, and during the celebration, somebody tried to hand her a German flag, and she immediately pushed it back. Keep in mind, this is the flag of the Federal Republic. It has no connection to, let's say, the late unpleasantness. And yet the Germans are so brainwashed that they're terrible people that they can't even wave the flag of their new country without being considered a bad person. And this is something else that Marshall falls into. He talks about, hilariously, over and over in the text, he keeps referring to rescuing the flag from extremist right-wing elements in a country. Okay, so it'll say, the right-wingers in Sweden are flying the flag, and this is a problem. He's basically intimating. But there's a problem here. If Marshall believes in liberal democracy, and he believes in free speech, okay? I'm talking about Marshall here, not about me. If he believes in those things, then why does the flag need to be rescued? The quote-unquote right-wing people have just as much right to it as the quote-unquote left-wing people if you believe in liberal democracy, if you believe in free speech, if you believe in the freedom of ideas. And it's contradictory because there are several parts where Marshall says in the text that you can't just call someone stupid because you disagree with them and think that that's going to be a winning argument. He was referring to Trump and to Brexit, to people who are arguing against those things, to say, well, it's not real helpful to just argue by calling someone stupid. That's not an argument. That's not how you win people over. And that's not how you understand where they're coming from in the first place. So I think it's problematic that Marshall keeps saying the flag needs to be rescued from right-wing elements. Why does it need to be rescued? If the arguments are compelling, they'll win in the marketplace of ideas, if you believe in that. But if you don't believe in that, if you believe there's a certain amount of free speech, but not free speech for those people, then you're a contradiction. And you're doing exactly what you intimate the quote-unquote right-wing people would do. You're saying the right-wing people are going to take away freedom of speech, but then you're doing the exact same thing. You're not being very, very helpful. He also really glosses over. So in the middle of the text, you're going to find these flags. And I just want to focus on here, Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is down here at the bottom. He spends a page on it, maybe. And he tells us that a UN representative imposed the flag on Bosnia. Now, Marshall's a very well-traveled journalist. He doesn't mention anything about what Bosnian people think about it. Not one word. He just gives the historical perspective. And with all of his connections, he could have asked one Bosnian person or asked somebody to ask a Bosnian person. I have. I've only been to Bosnia once. And when I was in Sarajevo, I had a chance to speak to a young lady who was maybe 8 or 9 years old during the siege of Sarajevo. Horrible thing. And she's obviously in her 20s now. And she told me the flag doesn't mean anything to her or to any other Bosnian, that it literally means nothing to them. They didn't come up with a flag. They have no attachment to it. It's just something that was imposed on them. And Marshall doesn't talk about this anomaly. Of all the flags that he's talking about in the book, this is, let's say, a flag that people care about the least. And instead of talking about that and talking about the significance of what happens when you have a flag that no one really cares about, that's imposed on you, well, it doesn't really mean anything. Instead, he just gives us a Wikipedia effectively entry on how the flag was created. And I think that's problematic at best. Okay, anyway, moving on to Eliot's other favorite chapters. He also liked the Asia and Africa chapters, as I did also to an extent. But I think in the Asia chapter, Marshall suffers from too much itis, which is, I don't know whether he felt like he had to cover a certain number of countries, but I very much feel that less is more here. That he, for example, spent, I think, 6 or 7 pages talking about all of the stands. That's Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, all of those going up, Pakistan, Afghanistan, all of those, 7 pages, right? And then he spends 7 pages on China alone. Now, this isn't to say that China's not important, but if you're doing a survey text, I think most people would benefit from learning more about the countries that they probably don't know much about, instead of hearing not that many insights into a country that they hear about all the time. So I don't think people are like, oh, I'm going to buy this book so I can read the 7 pages you're going to tell me about China, rather than I'd like to learn more about these other countries that are newer on the scene, that they've only been around since the breakup of the Soviet Union, and they're somewhat enclosed and private, and they're not really that open to the world, and I would like to know more about that. And that's more of the approach that I saw actually in the African chapters. He starts by giving us an introduction to Ethiopia, which sets the ground for Pan-Africanism and the implications for that. He also loops in Marcus Garvey and American history there. And then he goes on to cover Nigeria and South Africa. Okay. Now keep in mind, Africa, huge continent, so many countries, and he only talks about 3. And I think that approach was actually smarter, and he could have taken that same approach in the Asian chapter and, okay, maybe just a few more words about China and Japan. Yes, they're big countries. Yes, they're important. But if you're trying to introduce us, if you're trying to get us to dig into things a bit more, then I think we could have had less and in a sense gotten more from that. So to wrap up, one of the criticisms that the Marshall books have gotten, which I understand, is that he might gloss over detail here, or he dismisses something there. You have to keep in mind, Marshall comes from a particular point of view. He is a journalist, but he's not always objective, as much as I think he does a good job of trying to be. That, okay, well, because he says this, then the whole book is worthless. And, this is a really silly way, it's a really immature way to read a book, that, yes, someone can get a detail wrong, or someone can put together a conclusion that you disagree with, but it doesn't mean the whole book is worth dismissing. And as I've always said, the value of this entire series is its survey possibility. What he's doing is giving you lots of different data points and lots of different narratives. And then the ones that interest you the most are what you will dive into. And what I've done, this is what I did with my Power of Geography review, which I'll link to in the description, is a look at the Greek and Turkish conflict, as well as the Ethiopian Egyptian conflict. Those were the ones. It didn't mean that I didn't like the rest of the book, but those were the ones that interested me more. And then I ended up researching more about it on YouTube, reading about it more on the internet. And so that's the value of these books, not because this is such a great history book, or it gives you everything you need. In fact, I mean, it basically gives you a bare minimum, but I think enough of a taste to get you interested and for you to go deeper. And so thank you to Elliot for doing the work for me on this one by giving me his favorite chapters. That's what I ended up using to do the review. They ended up being some of my favorite chapters as well. But I think what's more important is to honor the fact that you read this as well, and I appreciate it. And it's a fun way to be involved with my readers in the comments. As always, if you like this video, if you think of another 13-year-old who might benefit from this, hit like, hit subscribe, share this with someone who would like this. You can also buy the book. In the description below, I have a link, affiliate link. That's one of the ways that you can support this channel. You can also join up to my Patreon or my YouTube membership. Those are both ways in which you can support the channel more. You'll get early releases of videos like this one. You also have the ability to nominate books. And another way that you can get a book bumped up in the line is by picking from my Amazon wish list, which is also linked in the description. A reminder that all of the revenues from YouTube, Patreon, etc., a portion of that this year in 2024 is going to go to the Palestine. Sorry, I've been saying the Palestinian, but the official is Palestine Children's Relief Fund. And this provides medical aid to children in Palestine who could not otherwise get it. Please consider donating directly, or as I say, if you like, leave a super thanks, whatever else, a portion of that is going to go. So however you'd like to send that money to them, please consider helping out. As always, enjoy your reading.